morning, everybody. Today I want to show you how to make a composite photo. So what I did was I took several pictures of the room I'm in on a tripod, some with me in it, some with me not in it, but they're all shot from the same angle and in the same lighting, which are two of the requirements for doing this work, is having the same perspective and the same lighting, remember, from the Eric Johansson video that we watched. So what we want to do today is we're going to do those pictures, put them together into a single picture. This is not the morphing, this is the composite picture, all right? What I'm doing essentially is I'm going to put myself in 3 different spots in the room, so you'll see in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to start with a picture taken from my desk in my office. So I'm going to put myself into several places in the room. I'm going to put myself into the foreground, into the middle ground, and into the background. So the middle ground will be probably right at the edge of the doorway. The background will be somewhere in the hallway, which you can see. And we're going to have a foreground picture where I'm going to be larger in the front and cropping off some parts. All right? So let's see how we can do this. Right, so you can see I've added a picture onto a new layer of myself standing in the same room. Notice the perspective is pretty similar. So what I want to do first is I want to get rid of the background and just cut out my image. So this picture could be anywhere. The background, the setting doesn't matter. I could have started with this picture and just added a background of me, but I don't want to have the one picture that's taking up so much room I can't see where I'm putting my other people, my other self. So I'm going to work with that. I'm going to cut out my image of me and work from there. So let's start out with, let's try this selection tool, see how much of me it gets. And it got a good portion, actually. It did pretty well. So this is called the object selection tool, where it tries to find a whole object. What it missed was some of the background here. Got a little bit of the background in close to the arm over here. Some in between my legs because the colors are too similar, and it looks like it's missing part of my arm there. So I got to go in and fix those things. So how can I do that? I'm going to use the lasso select tool, and first I'm going to add to the selection to fix that part on the arm. To do that, I want to zoom into that area. You see how part of the arm is not included in the selection? So I'm going to go back to the lasso select tool, and I'm just going to select around that area what I want to be included, and now it's part of the selection. Now I want to subtract out the part under the arm here that I don't want. So make sure you're turning that on to the subtract tool, which is this one here, and that'll cut out that part. There's a little tiny bit of my arm here that got missed. Probably wouldn't even notice it, but I'll just come in and get it. Okay, now in here is where some of the problems start. I want to subtract out this little sort of V shape, so I'm going to just trace the negative space there. And I got a little too much of the thumb, so I'm going to come back and fix that. Alright, I'm going to subtract out the rest of this negative space here that doesn't belong in the picture. So I'm going to trace carefully. I'm going a little quickly for the purpose of the video. If I were doing this professionally, I would definitely want to be a little bit more accurate and not make it look so choppy. I'm going to very slowly work to remove this. It's kind of hard to see sometimes where the shirt and the background are different. So if I miss a part of it, I'll try to fix it. I'm going to come along the arm here and get as close to the thumb as possible without going over it, and I can come back to here and let it finish. And I've gotten rid of a good portion of that. I missed a little bit over here. I got a little too much over here, so I'm going to add some of that back in. And I guess I could take a little bit off the tip of the thumb. And again, if I'm doing this professionally, I would do it a lot more carefully than I'm doing it now. Alright, that's not too bad. Let's take this out also. There's a little bit of too much of the background against the arm there. I'm going to do something called defringe at some point, and what that will do is that'll take off a pixel or so, depending upon what you choose, in any direction and help you fix those problems, make it look a little better. So in here we're missing a lot, so let's take a lot of this out of the selection. This is a lot easier if you use the tool to get the vast majority of what you're doing than it is if you're trying to use the lasso tool for the whole thing. I missed a piece there, I'll come back and get it. Up in here, it looks like legs separate over here. It's hard to tell again because the colors are very similar. I just want to make sure I'm getting the best approximation that I can. I want to add that little piece that I accidentally chopped out over here. And along the side here, there's some pieces that are missing the target, essentially. I want to get rid of that. And you can be pretty broad when you're taking things out. You have to be a little more careful when you're adding things in. Alright, and unfortunately, I'm a little bit behind the box, so that cut off a little part of the leg. There's a little piece in here to take out, a little bit in here, and that looks pretty good. Oh, I gotta add in my finger. I was cutting off my fingers there. Didn't even notice it at first. So let's get, we got a pinky in the back here. We got this finger over here, and there's a little bit of a knuckle showing over here that we missed. I think we are good now. I missed a little bit of the tip here. Okay, that's better. Alright, not too bad. Oh, there's this whole section in here that has to be subtracted. Remember, I'm going to invert the selection. I went off a little bit there. I can fix it. So now I got to add some of that back in where I had a problem. And subtract out a little bit more down toward the bottom over here. And again, you want to get it as good as possible. It's impossible to do it perfectly. Seeing a little bit more space in here. I'm just going to get that off like there. Otherwise it'll probably make it look like my pants are sagging down. Alright. I think that's pretty good. Right in here we have to take off that. So we're on subtract. There are better ways to deal with hair and beard. Using the masking tools, but for now we're just gonna be a little bit rough with our work. Up above the head here, it's also having trouble distinguishing between the hair and the background color. Alright, just a little bit over here. I can do this for hours, just chopping out little pieces, getting pieces a little bit more accurate. Probably never get it quite to where I want it to be, but it's not bad where it is now. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to go Command 0 or Control 0 if you're on a PC. Then I'm going to Control Shift I to invert the selection and hit delete. It's telling me that I could not complete it because the object is not editable, so I have to rasterize it first. So let's rasterize the layer, and then we can hit delete. And you see it doesn't look like much change, but the reality is if we turn off the background, I'm just isolated now, with the exception of the piece that's hidden behind the box. Alright, so now what can I do with this? So I'm going to deselect, Command D or Control D, depending upon if you're on a Mac or a PC. And let's make this the part of the image that is in the hallway. So what I want to do is I want to shrink it down. So I'm going to go, making sure I'm on the right layer. In fact, let's name this so I don't forget this is the hallway me. And I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Scale. I'm going to bring myself to a decent size that will fit back there. Also make sure that I'm on the ground. And what I want to do is, because of the cutoff part of the leg, I'm going to put that behind, like as if I'm coming around the corner. I'm still a little too tall for that space, so I'm going to scale some more. It is kind of a low ceiling, but my head doesn't come close to hitting it, so that's more appropriate for the size. So now how do I get it so that I'm behind this wall a little bit, so that it cuts off that part that I don't want to be seen in the picture? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the background image and I'm going to duplicate it. Let's just call it the mask layer. And there's my mask layer. I'm going to bring it on the top, and you'll see my picture is going to disappear back there. And what I'll do now is I'm going to click on the layer, make sure the layer is selected, and come to Layer, and then Layer Mask. And then I'm going to hide all. So now, this looks exactly as it did before, right? Except for the fact that I have a new layer over it. We can't see any of that layer. It's all hidden. But that layer is actually in front of this picture. So what do I do now is I'm going to click in that Layer Mask. Make sure it's highlighted like that. And I'm working on that layer. Let me zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. And I'm going to take my eraser tool and erase out part of that mask. So with the eraser tool, you want to set it to a size you can work with. And what you're going to do, and I'll tell you in a minute why you can't just do this with the eraser tool, is I'm going to erase And what I'm erasing now is the mask, not the image below it. If I hide the mask, the whole image is still there. You see that? I'm trying to get the edge of the wall as close as possible, working with the edge. And if I go over, we'll see in a minute that it's really not much of a big deal. What happened over there, we'll see that in a minute. But right now, I went over intentionally so that I can demonstrate to you how to fix that. All right, so now I'm going to make my brush bigger now that I've chopped off a good portion of that, and just get rid of the rest of this. And again, that's still there, it's just hidden behind the mask. And let's just leave a bit where I've chopped off too much. You see the blue sticking through there? It's kind of hard to see the color change because of the dark clothes I'm wearing and the darkness of the hallway. It's kind of hard to see that there's a difference, but you should be able to see a little bit. Let's go through Bob Ross a little bit, all right? So now I've erased part of the mask, and what's showing in front, if I turn this off, my whole picture is still there. I didn't erase any of myself, right? So how do I fix that? So now, working again in that mask, I could come back in with a paintbrush and make sure your brush is set to black. So you need your foreground color to be set to black. And you can set your brush to whatever size you want to set it. And you can kind of paint the mask back in. Black is fully hidden, so now I'm hiding the mask again in that area where I cleared out too much to get back in the image that's missing. So I probably don't want anything quite this big for close to the edge there. Now we want to deal with a smaller brush to get that right. But if I go too far, I could just go back to the eraser tool and erase out part. And keep working back and forth till I get it exactly the way I want it. See, if I erase directly on the layer with myself on it, I can't work back and forth this way to get it to the way I want it. That's not bad. That's pretty good right as it is. Notice that this corner is lower than my feet because it's a little bit closer, so that's good for perspective purposes. My pants are off the ground, so it's okay that I'm overlapping the base of the wall over there a little bit because the bottoms of my feet are definitely lower. So I'm in pretty good position. One of the things I forgot, and I mentioned, but I forgot to show you, is notice around the edges here, there's a little bit of a white fringe. That happens when you clip yourself from part of another picture. You get little bits of the background into the clipping. So one of the things you can do is you select that layer, and then you can go to Layer, and down at the bottom is something called Matting, and then you can defringe. And when you click on defringe, what happens is it allows you to choose the number of pixels. This is pretty small, so 1 or 2 will work. I'm going to do 2 pixels, and I'm going to hit OK. And when I hit OK, you notice how it chopped back some of that, and it still looks pretty clean and natural, but it took away some of that halo I was getting from the background. There's a little bit up here, but part of that is hidden anyway when I turn the mask back on. And if I wanted to, I could zoom into that spot there and get that little fleck. This is looking pretty good now with the defringing. Zoom in there a little bit. And I'm working on the eraser tool, and 76 is way too big. I'm going to bring it way down, even smaller. And I just want to take off that little shiny part because it's kind of a dark hallway and there's no light coming from there, so I don't want it to appear like there's another light. It is kind of dark. And I could work in closely, again, come back to the mask here. Looks like there's a bit of an overlap over here. And again, working back and forth between the brush, I could hit B, come to the brush, and really work that edge. If I'm working really close, it's probably a little easier to see where I missed. That brush is way too big for what I'm doing. Let's go smaller. Notice I'm using a hard brush. You definitely don't want fuzzy edges for this part. I'm looking for that bluish color that was kind of shining through before. Try and get rid of as much of that as I can. Okay. That's not too bad now. Oh, here's a bunch of it down toward the bottom. Again, you don't want it to look as though parts of your leg are missing, but you also don't want it to look like the wall is compromised either. That wall should be in front. So you want to make sure that you got that. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's zoom out again, Command 0 or Control 0. Now it looks like I'm in there. My lighting, because the lighting in this room is bright, I had a light shining on me, is a little brighter than it should be for back here. So working on hallway me, I'm going to go to image, adjustments, and I'm going to bring down the brightness contrast a little bit. So let's bring the brightness down. Because I'm in the hallway, I should be more shadowed. There is a light over here, and that's kind of matching up with the light on my hand there, so I'm pretty good with that. Notice there's a little bit of foreshortening. My hand is as big as my head because it was forward. Just noticing things from what we're doing. Also, with the light over here, I'd be casting the shadow in this direction. So I won't see much of a cast shadow on the wall, but we might see some. So I might deal with that a little bit. In fact, let's do that. Let's, on hallway me, let's put a drop shadow. So I'm going to go FX. I'm going to go down to drop shadow. And then I get my dialog box. Color, I'll probably go with something in this dark shadow color up here so that it's similar. I got to accept the color picker. All right. So now I should be able to move the shadow. Notice that blending mode that we use is multiply. And go around 60%, it's at 61 now. In this scenario, the light's coming from the bottom right. I need it coming from this light bulb, which is on my top left a little bit. So I want to angle it as close as possible as up there. And now I've got a bit of a drop shadow where I want it to be. I may have to fix that a little bit. Up here where the head is, for example, it looks like it's casting a shadow on this wall. And that would be in front of. So what I want to do is I want to come back to my mask here. Let's click OK to accept the drop shadow. And I'm going to click on the mask again. And I want to zoom in again, so I'm going to hit Z and click right up here to see if that's actually casting a shadow there. You see that shadow? I don't want that shadow there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my eraser tool. And remember, the shadow is above this image, but it's not above where the mask is. And I just want to get rid of that shadow. And the reason that's going away is because there is no shadow cast on the upper picture, that mask layer. All right, so now I'm well masked. I have a shadow on the wall and on the floor, if you look down at the bottom, being cast pretty well. It may be off a little bit. And one of the things that I could do is I can actually take the effect. So right click on the effect itself and click create layer. That's going to give me a shadow layer, a separate shadow layer. So now if I want, I can come back to hallway me. I'm going to turn down the opacity so we can see the shadow through it, but also see where I'm standing. You see where in the front here, I have shadow in front of my foot, but the light is not behind me. I want to fix that. So one of the things that I can do is I can move the whole shadow. So let's come down here. We can use our move tool. Click on the shadow and just move it back to where it would fit better. And then we have to see if it affects the top. It does not affect the top too much. That's pretty good for this part of the shadow. I could have also come in with an eraser tool. I could use the deform tool to distort it. Let's just bring me back to 100% opacity and zoom out, and that's looking pretty much better. There is depending upon the relationship between the light and this wall here, there could be some shadow cast from the wall onto me a little bit. So what I could do there would be under the mask layer or above the hallway layer, I could put in a transparent layer if I wanted to, and I can come with the paintbrush tool and set the brush to multiply and set the opacity down to around 60% again, because that's what the other one is at. Close enough. And I'm going to zoom in again. I'm going to hit Z, come in here, and scroll down, and just put a little bit of a shadow from this wall being cast onto me. So I'm going to go back to my paintbrush tool. The shadows tend to be fuzzy, so I don't need a hard tool for that. So I'm going to soften it. Make the tool a little bigger, and I'm just going to kind of paint a little shadow that's too dark. So even on multiply, even at 61, that's too dark. And we just want it sticking out a little bit so that we can see that wall is casting a bit of a shadow, and you're not going to see too much down here. Just enough to make it look realistic. I see the shadow is somewhat affecting down here too, this shadow dow here. So I'm going to come back to my mask, make sure the mask is selected, and come back to my eraser tool so I could hit E, and I'm going to erase out more of that. I don't want the shadow on the corner as much as I want it on the wall behind me, so I need some of that mask to fix that. Alright, so that's the first step. I got me in there pretty well. I think I probably should put some of the shadow layer, and I think this ear should probably be a little bit shadowed, so I'm going to come back to my brush tool and just add a little shadow on this side of the head. Because it's away from the light, just kind of soften that a little bit, and just kind of tap in some of the shadow on that side. Don't want anything too bright there because it's around that dark corner where those dark shadows are. So we're trying to soften that a little bit. And when we zoom out, it's a little dark, but I'm going to live with that for now. I'm going to go Command 0, and that looks a little better. Alright, so thinking about where the shadows and highlights are important. You could add in more highlights if you need to. You can adjust shadows. You could separate your drop shadows from the layer and move and distort them in all different kinds of ways. So let's take a break here and we're going to load the next layer. Alright, so you see there I am in the picture. If I make it invisible, you can see me standing in the hallway. Notice that I'm completely gone here because we have to select this image and trim it out again, right? So I'm going to come back to that image selection tool, the object selection tool, and you've got to, for this to work, you have to make a rectangle around the whole thing. You can't miss any parts. And that one really selected pretty well. There might be a couple of places I got to zoom in and trim, but that was really close. Alright, so let's come back and fix that a little bit. So how do we do that? We're going to hit Z and zoom in. And you see the whole section in between my legs here was missed, so I'm going to go again to my lasso select tool. And the reason I'm using lasso as opposed to using the polygonal one is because these are not such straight lines. Lasso is going to give you curves more. And you can also, if you really want to be really close with the curves, the pen, the Bezier tool, will make really accurate selections. You just have to set it to path and then convert the path to a selection. And I'm just chopping out now the parts that should not be in the picture, not be in the selection. I'm sorry, they're in the picture, but we're going to get rid of them. A little piece over here. Hard to see in here, but I think I'm seeing brown. Let's go along the arm here. I may have missed a little bit there. I'm going to come back and add in a little bit. And I got to take out a little bit by the arm here. It's a little bit off the arm. The fringing will fix some of that, but don't rely on the fringing to fix big areas. Okay, and here you see is a piece of the molding that's a similar color to my beard, being mistaken for some of my beard, and the door also. And a little bit up here. Now the image of me that's all the way in the background, it's probably a little less critical to be as accurate, though you want to be as accurate as possible. If you miss something, it's further in the background, it's not going to be as easy for the viewer to see who's going to see your image. But in the foreground, you want to try and be as accurate as possible, and make sure you're working back and forth to take out parts and to add in other parts. You want to get this as good as possible. In here in the ear area, that's looking pretty good and pretty accurate. Down here by the tips of the feet, I'm missing some of the shadow that's being cast. Is actually not part of the shoe, but it's being mistaken for shoe. Okay, so I'm going to Command 0 to zoom back out. That's a pretty decent selection. I'm going to invert the selection, Command I, Command Shift I, I'm sorry. Command I would just invert the colors. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure I rasterize it this time so I don't get that error message. So rasterize layer, and then hit delete. Okay, now you can see me there. Now I don't want myself blocking most of my other self, so I'm going to fix that up a little bit. I'm going to deselect, so I'm going to Command D to deselect. And I can use the move tool to move this iteration of myself to other parts. If I don't change the distance, I don't really need to change the size or scale too much. So that's one possibility. I can move myself out in front here, and then I'd have to make myself larger, scale myself up because I'm in closer. So why don't we do that? Let's scale me up. I'm going to put myself in front of a little bit of the keyboard over here, and I'm going to scale myself up. Let's go to Edit, Transform, and Scale, and grab a corner and scale myself up. And I'm thinking about where the vanishing point is and the perspective and so on and so forth, and my relative height compared to the ukulele. If I stand next to the ukulele, my head is actually higher than the top of the ukulele, which it is. It's right a little above the top of the ukulele, maybe a little bit larger. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to move myself over just a little bit more. And I'm going to click the check mark there. All right, so I'm not really behind anything there. So in that case, I don't really need to work as much with the layer mask. If I wanted to put myself behind the keyboard, for example, there is a lot of space between the keyboard and the wall, but let's say I wanted to do that, then I could use the layer mask to bring the keyboard forward. Here I'm going to go Layer. I'm going to go down to Matting and Defringe, because I can see some of that little weird highlight that happens when you trim something. And I think a pixel would do it on this one. I think this was pretty close. So I'm going to click OK and just trim off for 1 pixel. So now there are 2 of me there. I got to now consider where am I going to be casting a shadow on what objects, and how is that shadow going to work. So I'm going to start with a drop shadow again. I'm going to scroll down to drop shadow, and I want to see what is happening. So I'm going to move this over out of the way. Now my source of light is more in front of me. My brightest light was lower than my face, so the shadow should be coming from down lower than my face a little bit. And I can see where the shadows are on the wall. So I've got shadows to the right and to the left because there are multiple sources of light. So I could actually add multiple shadows if I want. Notice my shadows are dark here. I want them to match the shadows that are here. So again, I can click in here. I can select one of these shadows, one of the darker ones, and that's going to give me the shadow color that's going to match similar to what's on the wall. See how it's closer? I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to, so I've got shadows coming from, there are actually multiple sources of light in this room. You're seeing multiple shadows. I'm going to start with a shadow that is with the light source coming from this direction a little bit to move the shadow to my right, or to my left, to our right, right? It's going to react differently as it bends around the instruments and so forth, so I'm going to have to deal with that. But as a first step, that's getting me in there somewhat and looking more natural. So how do I deal with that now? I'm going to, again, come down to Effects, and I'm going to right-click on Effects. Oh, I got to accept this first. That effect isn't really there till I accept it. Right-click on Effect and create a layer, and I know it's going to give me that dialog. Just click OK. So now this is the shadow for that layer. I'm going to call this Me Too, and this could be the shadow for Me Too. And now I'm going to think about how is that shadow going to deform and change as it goes around the different objects in the room. So like for example over here, this is a straight up and down area. So that's probably accurate, but as it goes on the keys, it's going to bend the direction of the keys and flatten out a little bit over there. So I may have to do this in sections to make it look a little bit better. Because right now it's looking a little bit strange, as if I'm standing in front of a picture of those things instead of standing in front of the actual objects. So let's make myself invisible, and let's be working on this layer a little bit. All right, so now, before I mess with it, because I'm going to make multiple shadows, I'm going to duplicate this layer. Let's call this Shadow Me Too, and I'm going to make that one invisible as well. Alright, so let's work on this shadow here. So one of the things that I can do is I can go Edit, Transform, and I can hit Skew or Distort, and that's going to change things a little bit. Like for example, if I pulled out a corner like that, that's going to help the parts that kind of flatten out in this direction a little bit more. The problem is it's going to affect other sections as well. So I'm going to hit Control Z, and instead, let's turn that off for a minute. I want to select a part that I want to stay pretty straight. Let's say this part over here. So I'm going to go to my polygonal select tool because I think that'll work best. So I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to select a polygon shape across the edges, the front edges of my keys, and down here, over here, and up to here. And I can still, with the polygonal tool, I can add to selections, I can subtract from selections, and so forth. I have some other pretty straight areas that I don't want to affect. In fact, everything below that area is probably okay, so I'm going to add to that just by selecting and keeping the shadows kind of as they are in those areas. Where this shadow is, I'm okay with that because that's on a flat wall. There's a bend here where the wall bends, so I want to kind of capture that a little bit and adjust it a little bit, but for now I want to select it separately. So I'm going to kind of click in the corner there, try to get that corner exactly as it is. I think I'm okay with most of what's happening on the ukulele. I'm going to come right to here. I don't have to select exactly the shadow. I just have to select the area. I'm going to eventually invert this. So this little piece I need to eliminate. This that's on the wall over here, I'm kind of okay with all of that. So let's select that out. It's mostly what's happening on the keyboard, on the edge of the ukulele. The edges of the guitar are behind me anyway, so I don't really need to worry about that too much. Let's go right to here and select. I want to keep that edge of the wall and select around the books there. Alright, so now I think I've selected what I want to select. I'm going to try and affect the part that I've not selected, so I'm going to invert my selection. And what I can do now is I can hit Edit, Transform, and Distort. And it's going to distort now those other areas without affecting. I'm going to pull this down more on this side, and you can see the shadow is shifting. Pull this up a little bit on this side in the center. Don't want it to be too far off, but you see now the shadow's broken where the wall is bent. And the shadow on the keys are laying a little flatter. I pulled the shadow so far down it went below the books there. I don't really want that to happen. I just want it to kind of pull out at the edges. So let's do that. That's keeping my integrity. A little bit of the shadow. Notice the change here. I definitely want it to look more like it's laying flatter onto the keyboards. I'm going to hit Command minus to zoom out a little bit, and the head totally got moved, so I want to pull this out back to here a little bit, and I don't want it to separate, but I do want it to show that it's in two different parts. And again, that affects the keys a little bit, so I'm going to keep playing with this. I think that's going to work just like that. That's working fine. So I'm going to click the check mark and deselect, Command D, and I'll put my picture back up. And now you can see there's a little edge of the wall there. You can see that it's laying flatter on the keys, but still straight where it needs to be straight. Second shadow, if I turn that on, I can actually just move that whole shadow. So I want to move this out over here more for that second shadow. And I also want to make this one more transparent. So I'm going to click on the opacity and bring it down quite a bit, because the second shadow is much lighter than the first shadow. You know, all the instruments and stuff that are casting more than one shadow. And that's really not too bad the way it is right there. I'm going to leave that right there. Okay, so we're into the third picture. It's of me in a chair now. I'm going to bring this way into the foreground, but before I do that, I want to trim myself out of the background picture. You can see it in just covering those other pictures. I'm pretty successfully in two places. I want to put myself in a third place now. So again, I'm going to start with the object selection tool. I think that is the best tool for getting you close and started, and then once you're close enough, coming back to either the lasso select, polygon tool, the Bezier pen tool, something that's going to help you take out what you don't need, right? All right, I do want the chair in the picture, so I'm going to add to the selection, and I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hit Z to zoom in. I want to select the whole chair as well as my person, so let's go to and use the lasso tool and kind of carefully get the edge Again, this is going to be the most in the foreground, so I want to be most careful with this image. Oops, I got way too much up here, so I'm going to have to subtract some of that out. And it happens, you sometimes grab what you're not intending to grab. Working with a mouse is sometimes a little bit difficult. You want to add in the rest of the hair here. I'm going to get this edge of the chair. I'm still missing a little edge here. Again, working with the mouse is difficult. I can actually work with my pen tool if I wanted to. I have a Wacom tablet, and most of you will be working with a mouse and or a touchpad. So I kind of want to do it the way you're going to be doing it. I'm missing a lot here, but I got it in closer. Probably zoom in more to see what I'm missing and what I've got too much. Let's come back to the lasso select tool, which by the way is the letter L. I'm going to fix the edge of the arm there and the edge of the armrest. So if it's part of me and part of the chair, I want it in the picture. If it's part of the background, I want it out. Here's a little edge I missed, and this part I want out, so I'm going to subtract that out. And none of these things happen quickly. You have to be really patient with these. I need to get the part of the chair here, so what I'm going to do is go to add. I'm going to go the edges of the chair. I'm just going to bring it off over here and fix it. Now I got to subtract out what's the shadows under the chair and stuff, so I'm going to come down to my legs. And I cannot see well, so I'm just going to bail over here. This is clearly not supposed to be in there. It looks like a leg is coming up and in and across like that. I think my leg is bent here, so I think I'm missing a good section of the leg. Okay, that's pretty good, I think. Let's move it over this way. How are we doing over here? That's pretty good. Might be a little bit of box in different spots. Easier to take it out now than to try and do it with matting or whatever else. Okay, so what's chair here and what's not chair? I might have to zoom out to see that better. Let's take this out for sure. I'm not sure about this. Let's zoom out and see what we see. That looks like part of the leg of the chair, maybe. So let me see. So I'm going to go Command 0 to zoom out. I think that is part of the mechanism of the chair. And although I think I'm going to be hiding that, I still want to select it. So I'm going to add to the selection, come around here. I don't think it's going to be in the picture, but just in case some of it is, I'd rather deal with it now than deal with it later. Alright, that's not bad. Alright, so I think I have my selection pretty close to where I want it. So I'm going to invert the selection. Again, on the Mac, Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I if you're on a PC. We want to rasterize the layer. And we want to hit delete. So now, right now, as it is, it looks like I've come into the picture. So I'm going to hit Command-D or Control-D. I want to move my whole character forward. That's going to be the closest thing. So I want to grab the Move tool, make sure I'm on the right layer. I'm going to call this Me 3. And I'm going to drag it down. Things that are in the foreground tend to be lower in the picture, and then I got to scale it up because look at the size of my head here. If it's closer, it should be bigger than the size of my head here. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Scale, and I'm going to scale it up by dragging a corner, and this should be the largest part of the image, and I'm going to bring it down a little bit lower. Not bad. I think that works. I'm going to click my checkbox, and now I'm in the image in 3 places. I still have to consider the shadows, where shadows might be, and as far as everything else goes, I think it's looking pretty good. The colors, notice this one's in the darker hallway. My colors are more muted, where the colors are the same color because from the ones in the room. The lighting, you can see where the lighting is reflecting on my glasses and all the different images. I think it's pretty good. So let's deal with the shadow a little bit. So I'm going to again add a drop shadow. Now this is going to be weird because it's kind of casting a drop shadow in the air. So I'm definitely going to have to separate it and move it around, distort it. Let me click OK, right click, and I'm going to create a layer with that shadow on it. Again, click OK, and it's now, because I named it Me3, it's called Me3's Drop Shadow, which is cool. And now I can just click on that layer, and I can transform and move things. Let's just start with moving. So let's click on the shadow and move it a little bit down. Moved it down. There's no like wall behind me, so there shouldn't be much shadow in the air there. It's causing a little bit of a shadow over here. I can move it in here a little bit more. I do want some of this shadow over there. And I need to get some shadow from where my arm is onto my pants, but my pants are black, so you might not see that too much. So the shadows might not be too obvious on this part of the image. I do want to defringe that. So let's go to Layer, Matting, and Defringe, and you'll see as I let's take 2 pixels off on this one. Take off those little edge pixels. You see the edges look a lot nicer. They look a lot more natural. I think I'm going to be okay with this one as is right now. So if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. You definitely want to, again, keep the lighting, keep the perspective as much as possible. Take multiple pictures. I have more pictures over here that I didn't use. This is for a composite part of your picture. Don't forget that you also have to morph something in your picture. Nothing is morphed in this image. Composite means I'm putting multiple pictures together, but all the objects stay separate, right, to create a scene. So I'm making a composite picture here. So now I'm in 3 spots. I'm in the foreground, I'm in the middle ground because I'm behind other things, and I'm in the background, way behind other things. I used some masks. I did not use or demonstrate the Puppet Deform tool yet. I can do that in another video. So that's one of the tools I would like you to strongly consider using, is the Puppet Deform somehow in your creation of this picture. All right, so have a wonderful day, and I hope your artwork comes out awesome.